Hello and welcome to the Techno-Optimist. Matt, what number?
Number 7.
Number 7.
Another Saturday.
This one is really exciting. We were just checking sound levels with Gray Scott. He's a futurist, a neuro-technology-philosopher, speaker, writer. He's also the contributor blogger for the Futurist magazine, a professional member of the World Future Society, and founder of the editorial director of SeriousWonder.com, as well as, the bio goes on, and I'm going to let him jump into it because his futuristic tendrils go all over the place, and it's going to be a beautiful opportunity to talk to him. And Matt's saying that we have him. Great.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing really good. All right, so we were talking actually, I'm just going to let you jump right into where we were at. If you want to give yourself, a little what's on your mind today.
So, in the pre-show notes, you and I sort of went over this idea of what I've been talking about, which is the sex bot revolution.
Love it.
And it's an interesting thing that's happening. There was a book written called Love and Sex with Robots by David Levy. And in his book, he talks about this idea that, by the 2050s, we will see robotic marriages in the United States. And it is interesting because we are moving in that direction, right? I mean, artificial intelligence is growing. It's hardware and software when it comes to humanoid robots is growing. You see in the news recently, there was an article talking about, I think it was HuffPost, it was talking about how Amazon for the very first time sold the highest number of sex toys.
Wow.
Online.
Sure.
So it's a really interesting thing. So the digital world has allowed people to sort of move past their local morals, I guess. Like if your community is a very small community and it's looked down upon to have a sex toy.
Yeah.
Who needs to know that except for you and the post office, right? Or you and the FedEx guy.
Sure.
I mean, and what's so amazing about this idea is that people could have partnerships with these robots in the future that were never they were never capable of before. So we could see a whole generation of sex bots that are sex bots is sort of the catchy phrase, but it's much deeper than that. I mean, imagine someone who is in their 60s who has lost their husband or wife, someone they've been married to for, 40 years.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to live the rest of your life alone if you're not interested in dating or if you're just so heartbroken that you can't find anyone else.
Sure.
But imagine having this amazing companion. It doesn't have to be sexual either. So as we see this revolution of home care bots, the next stage obviously is going to be the sex bot revolution.
Now, we discussed in great detail last podcast about the Oculus Rift. One thing we didn't jump into is all the 3D companies that are taking on virtual sex that is going to come of this. And I think that's the correlation that you just made with, people that don't have that. For me, before I'm in a long-term relationship now, but before that, in the dating scene, you have all the insecurities that are there in front of you. And if you could virtualize that, intimate experience, I think it's somewhat, it's a virtual training ground. It's a virtual.
Well, and I don't want to be the anime nerd here, but that's basically what the show Chobits is kind of about.
Do they cover all that?
Yeah, and you take the messiness out of relationships, the unpredictability. You're removing that from the equation of two humans interacting, and people kind of gravitate towards that. It's
I think
neat experience.
People are instantly going to scoff at this, but I've been thinking about this a lot recently, that there's no correlation that they've been able to find between violent video games and violent actions in the world around us. And I think there is a part of us that, we still have our primate self, that is that chimpanzee that wants to go conquer. And I think that especially these teenagers with having an outlet like the virtual world to go into that realm and let out their aggression is an outlet. And I think that if you gave them that virtual sexual experience as well, you can have these sex therapists that are artificially intelligent driven and actually be able to walk these teenagers or even myself through certain insecurities that limit my sexual experience.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting. I mean, the virtual world is sort of the precursor for the sex bot revolution because, all of these tools that we're using, the iPhone, I mean, your phone itself, Android, whatever, these relationships that we have with these objects are a very deep, connected, emotional relationship. I mean, I just want people that are listening to this, think about, and the two of you as well, think about the moment. And I have to say this, I never lose my phone. I'm one of those people that never, I never lose my phone. But, we know people, we have friends that lose it like every 2 weeks.
Sure.
And the moment that I have lost a phone before, yes, of course, but it's very, very rare. But the moment that you lose that phone, there is an emotional response that is so visceral, right? So we're constantly checking in with the phone. We wake up with it. We look at it. It's the last thing we look at before we go to bed. So it is a precursor. All of these objects are a precursor to becoming emotionally attached to artificially intelligent robots. Now, I've been saying that the first generation of this sex bot will be, obviously it won't have deep AI, right? It won't have its own autonomous feelings. It won't have its own ability to say, I'm not happy in this relationship, I'm ready to go. The software will just be programmed responses, right?
Sure.
But what I'm really talking about is the secondary and third level, more as we get towards 2050. Like the second and third stage of this sex bot revolution that's where you're going to see things get complicated, because as artificial intelligence comes to fruition, you're going to have robots that decide that they're not happy in these relationships. And so who gets to tell this robot who has emotions, this is deep AI, third generation sex bot I'm talking about, who gets to tell this robot that I don't care if you're unhappy, you have to stay with me, right? I mean, so you see the complexity that could go on. And I think that's where society is going to have a hard time with this, is when do these artificially intelligent robots that we've used as housekeepers and factory workers and sex toys or sex slaves, really, when do they get to have their own voice?
Do you feel that by 2050 we would be still contained in this biological substrate? I feel by 2050 the as you're saying, like with the iPhone, it is an extension of myself, and my computers, the technium that is around me is an extension of myself. And it's a symbiotic relation that I'm merging with more and more every day. And by 2050, I seriously hope to not still be in my meat bag. This bias, I truly hope to transcend that. If that's, the Kurzweilian singularity, or we talked to Randall on this podcast about substrate independent minds, being able to upload into a new substrate.
Well, that's interesting, because when you start talking about the idea of the substrate itself, then of course you're touching on the simulation theory. And in the work that I've been doing, and I'm glad that you're open to talking about this idea, because talking about this, you have to be very careful, because a lot of people, first of all, are not ready. People aren't even ready for the cell phone or mobile revolution that's happened. I mean,
no.
To jump from talking about simple robotic relationships all the way to the simulation is a very huge leap for people.
Yeah.
So I tend to pace myself with people, but if knowing that you guys are open to talking about this is great.
The first podcast I had made the statement, and I've received a lot of feedback, good or bad. I mean, I've seen people turn Medusa on me when I claim to resonate more with the subjective experience that I am a technological being trapped in a biological substrate. Like I transcend my biology every day through my technology, and that's more so every day. You're right. I wake up. Go ahead.
If you really have like even a beginner understanding of physics and how quantum physics works, you can make the case that yes, this is a simulation. What I see, what my eyes are seeing isn't really what's there. I'm seeing these particles reflecting light and being changed into an image. It is a simulation of sorts.
Well,
so
it's a
it
neurological.
depends how deep you want.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well, see, that's the fascinating piece of what I'm trying to get to with my work, and it's a tightrope that you have to walk, because on one hand you have to talk about the things that people can comprehend on the now level, right? So when I talk about this technology, basically explosion that's happening in our universe right now, I try to use references from research labs, things that are being produced right now as we speak, and I use those as references, and I say to people, you can see that if we're creating this today, that in 10 years, the way things are growing, you can see the explosion of information technology that's about to occur. So the idea, what you were saying a second ago about understanding biology, the word biology itself is a misnomer, because biology in its principle is an algorithm. It is a set of numerical movements. It is a set of chemical shifts that happen and something occurs, right?
Yeah.
So for people to think about biology as a separate thing from geometry is wrong. It's I always say, if you take
You there, Gray? Did we lose you?
Still there.
Geometric, numerical universe, and people really don't understand that unless they've looked in that deep level. So I always say, and my message has been, there is no difference between nature and geometry. There is no difference. It is the same thing. That's why you find the Fibonacci sequence in growth patterns. That's I always say to people, before the Earth was even cooled down, after it was heat, volcanoes were erupting, no life was on the planet. Before the Earth was even cooled, numbers were here. Geometry was in the universe. So technology is a natural reflection of human consciousness. There is no separation. And the only people that want to separate that are the people that are under the belief that there's duality in the universe, that there is some greater consciousness that is moving us about as puppets. And I don't believe that. There's a lineage, a connected lineage that goes back to the very beginning, whether you believe that was a Big Bang, or whether you believe there is some essence in the universe that's geometric and numerical, and it can't be separated. So people that are afraid of technology, I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And the foundation for shifting my belief came from a lot, of course, Abundance and all those other books. But Kevin Kelly really hit it on the head. And I have yet to change my perspective after reading What Technology Wants by Kevin Kelly. That one, it just took me on this what you're saying, from the beginning of the first rock that we chipped to make that tool that has been with us ever since. This is technology is an organism just as much as our biological meat bag here. Mm-hmm. Technology is its own organism, and it has its own wants and its needs. And after that book, I had been thinking about it, that if technology is alive, what is its digestion? What is it converting? And it's converting human attention. Our attention and our imaginations create, and it gets even deeper when you take into perspective that language itself is the first real technology in human cognition. And so when language is a technology, and we've made the distinction that it's an organism, well, then these memes take on replication. So I'm sending you an organism. These memes are marinating in your brain, and they're coming together just like the RNA is coding for the genes that bend the proteins. These memes are finding associations in your brain, and then at some point they gestate, and then if you're a programmer, they literally birth through your fingertips.
Manifest, right?
They birth through your fingertips on the keyboard, and then they create the Instagram, and then 9 months later you have $2 billion. Like, that can happen.
I love it. It's so brilliant. And see, that's the algorithm that I'm talking about, right? So, people assume that what we're calling the meat bag is this autonomous individual, self-hosted, that's the only way I can say it, object that's floating around in the universe. And we know that's not accurate. there's a lineage that we have on this planet throughout history. There is no autonomous human being. There was always a parent set. Yeah. So you can follow that lineage all the way back to crawling out of the ocean. You can follow that ocean being made from an asteroid or a meteorite or something that came here and brought all the water here. So there's a whole lineage that goes way back, deep, deep, deep into the universe. And my real question is, what the hell is the universe? I mean, let's, because if we have a deeper relationship with the universe, if we can figure out what it is we're looking at, and I just want to point this out too, this is mind-blowing to me. We are living in a time machine. The Earth is literally a time machine. When you look up into the night sky, you're not seeing what's going on right now. You're seeing the past.
Yeah, yeah.
So the Earth itself is a floating time machine. I mean, just think about that. That alone should just stop humanity in its tracks. But, reality TV is just
you just blew my mind with that, because we're sitting on this time machine, but it took us through that wonder, like you wanting to know what the universe was, that now the Hubble is literally our telescope, but it is literally our eye through the time machine.
In the sky.
It's an external time machine, or a lens through the past.
If you think about it, it's the speed of light. That's what's creating this lag there, because there's a limit on that, and so depending on how far out you are, that's how long it's going to take to get here.
That calls into the speed of light has always been that constant, and then coupling that with simulation theory, it seems that
makes
that
you think, can you change the constant? Then is
the constant the actual line of the substrate,
the resolution?
And so that's actually the 0 and 1 that the universe uses to actually calculate the algorithms. Go back to
0, that's where
that lead to introspection and curiosity, wonderment.
Mind
telescope.
Sufficiently blown.
Well, what's amazing is that we know for a fact that if you alter the brain, the perception of the individual's time space literally is altered.
What a good segue there, Gray. Let us go into that.
How would one alter such a...
So for example, if you have a lesion or an accident where the frontal lobe or a certain part of the brain is disturbed, you can the perception of the person inside of that brain sees the world on a timescale that's different. There are a couple of cases where people have reported brain damage, and then the person sees the universe around them, the people moving faster than they can keep up with. And they keep saying, everyone's moving so fast. This is not, I'm getting older and time's moving faster, because that's a whole different subject. This is literally their time scale has been altered. So they have a hard time keeping up with what's going on, because it seems like everything is moving so fast. On a micro scale, all of us have a different perception of time. We know that. So my question is the universe itself and our perception of the universe and our perception of time space, are we... So, for example, human beings, right? Human beings have a certain time space perception, but that may not be the perception of the rest of the universe. The Earth probably has a very different perception of time space, and advanced extraterrestrial beings, if they're out there, which I think they are, they probably have also a different perception of time space. So people say, well, it would be impossible for an advanced civilization to cross from star to star because it would take so long. Well, if you have a time perception that is so dramatically different than what we have, going across 100,000 years, especially if they're immortal, which I would think by that time they would be, then that perception is like, a week. It takes a week to get to Earth. Yeah. So I'm really curious as to what the relationship is between looking out into this past history, this time machine that we see around us, the universe, and our perception of that. Because in one lifetime, not a lot changes in the night sky. I mean, one lifetime, let's say 90 years right now, you're not seeing a lot of change in the night sky. But if we were here for 10, 20, 30,000 years or 5 or 6 million years, the night sky would look very different. So the time perception would be shifted. So, it's the whole cliche of the butterfly on the branch, right? I mean, the butterfly's like, what the hell's a tree? So, I really love Alan Watts. I don't know if you guys are familiar with his work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He's amazing. And one of the main things I took from his work is the idea that perception is relationship. That's it. There is no relationship without perception, and vice versa. So you have to have some substrate to have perception. There has to be something to push against. There has to be some nervous system response to say, oh, that's a hard floor under my feet, or that's a cold wind brushing up against my skin. There has to be some relationship. So the wind and the skin have a relationship. The eye and the cosmos has a relationship. Without one or the other, there is no relationship. There is no consciousness.
I think that's beautiful. I don't know if he goes there, but you just sparked the thought to me that it is about relationship. One of the things I primarily focus on is perception, but it's the perception of the language I use. So if my perception, if you use it, the relationship as language, the substrate for that relationship to happen is language, and that is actually the neuronal scaffolding that is set up through the language that you use. That is actually causing the abstraction of the world around us. So it was our perceptions abstracting the world through the relationship of objects which allowed us to simulate probable futures. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Alan Watts goes there, but you just threw me onto that.
In some of it, he wouldn't use necessarily that language because, of course, we're talking about, 60s and 70s that he was really doing all of his lectures. So he had a very different language for talking about this. And this is a thing that I think is amazing when we talk about language. Our generation, and I've said this in interviews before, people have to get to know a new set of language right now. Yeah. We're using words and concepts that people are, if you're not familiar, if you don't study this field, I had somebody on my Facebook say, I can't understand a word you're saying. and I thought to myself, it felt so strange because I feel like I'm using very basic principle language, but if you don't understand the concepts of the language itself, right, that idea, using this word scaffolding of the mind, I mean, what does that mean to people if they don't understand algorithm of human history, right? This type of language that people are using, that we're using, it is also manifesting new consciousness. It's projecting a new future. And that's what I love about working in the future field, is that just using the language itself could birth this new future. That's the potential that we have.
I'll pull it more local and provincial. Yesterday I had... He's 18. He's 5 weeks away from graduating high school, and he was over at my place, and he's an avid listener of the podcast. He contributes to the Facebook page quite a bit, but he's not understood. He's into all of this futurist type of stuff, but that's not the language that high school kids type of use. So he feels very isolated in his ideas. Well, he has built a functioning Tesla coil that he was disappointed in himself for only creating a 6-inch spark off this Tesla coil. Mm-hmm. And so for him, he was let down. And I had to give him a perspective that out of every human to ever be on this earth, give it 100 billion, 50 billion, however many has come, how many could even listen to the first word of that, Tesla, and understand what you're talking about? So give yourself a percentage of the humans that have existed on this earth, and the very first word that you use has a huge understanding that has to happen. You have to know about Tesla. You have to know about electricity. You have to know about so many different things to talk about what a Tesla coil is. And you're right. I run into that. I say substrate independent minds all the time now after having an understanding of Randall's work and those type of things. But if I tell that to my mother, she glazes over and she's just like, I love you.
It's a generational thing.
Yeah. Well, it's a language gap thing. And so I think it's an opportunity for all of us, being futurists, being philosophers, those type of things, to create linguistic bridges, to walk people into these perspectives and allow them to see that wonder and awe that Carl Sagan so beautifully was able to do, as a wonder junkie. And, he was a cosmic revolutionary and, all of those type of things. And I mean, that's what got me into your work, Gray, is that, you beautifully articulate a lot of these future probabilities, and I think that that's very valuable in this day and age.
The more you can get that into the public consciousness and get them thinking about it, the more attention is put.
This is I said it in the last one that attention is a commodity more valuable than oil in this consumer capitalistic world, and it is really that powerful in this day and age. And you're doing it. You take these ideas and you imprint them with wonder and optimism, and that imprint, when those memes gestate inside of people's brains, that it's a harmonious type of symbiotic relation to these ideas, and then they can actually they perceive that ecstatic type of vision that we see when we see out, and we can see the Hubble as an extension of our eye. That I can't remember the article, but it talked about Jason Silva. He's the one who talks about it quite a bit, that the Hubble is an ontological awakening. It takes the whole of space and time and transduces it through the optic nerve. So the whole of space and time, something so incredibly big, can fit through something so incredibly small. And that, just constructing language in that way is just the most beautiful thing I've heard.
Well, it's interesting. I'm also a big fan of Terence McKenna's work, and he really, for me, he really made me understand what the power of language is, and what you can do with language. But it's more than using words. Language itself is a vibration. And I've said this many times to friends, and I've said it to people that I've worked with, even if you don't understand what I'm saying, it's fine. Because what's happening is that I'm leaving you with a seed of energetic energy that, even if you don't understand the words or sometimes even the concepts, just live your life and move on, because people who do understand what I've said will be drawn to you. And that's really a mystical idea, but I believe that that's absolutely true. So I'm using language as you guys are using language. Whether people understand you or not, you're really just putting that spectrum of energy out there, and it does become real. It does become something that manifests in a real substrate. When we say real substrate, we're assuming that the universe that we see around us is actually real. And that's actually something I want to talk about quickly going into this idea of the simulation, right? So the thing that has sort of plagued me in my work is I'm trying to figure out are we really looking at a universe outside of ourselves, or are we looking at a reflection of the system itself? And what I mean is, there was talking about Jason Silva. He had his last video was really interesting.
Mind mirroring, yeah.
Yeah. So, is that really what's going on? Has the camera just turned on itself? I mean, is that what consciousness really is? I mean, I had an amazing experience. I went to Peru to work with ayahuasca, and I stumbled out into the middle of the night on my second ceremony.
Let's preface with what ayahuasca is for the audience, because I know that a lot of the listeners are first going to go, "Wait, what's ayahuasca?"
Yes. So, well, go ahead. I mean, I'm sure you guys have talked about.
Actually, we've left all psychedelics out of the podcast thus far, so this is a perfect opportunity, because each one of us has had a very, very intimate experience that has been it pulls you so far out of context that it changes your perspective for the rest of your life, as much as a religious apotheosis that people come back from, Saul to Paul. Those type of things is what I had in my life as well. And the actual chemical that is it, so the scientists here, it's dimethyltryptamine with an MAO inhibitor that allows it to be orally activated. And what all that means is the same. The hypothesis is that when you go to sleep at night, your brain is flooded with these psychedelic chemicals.
The dream.
This dimethyltryptamine takes you on to this lucid, or this dream-like state. And so you could have a waking dream induced by shamanic ritual in the right set and setting. I think does that.
And you should, if you want, the very beginning, obviously indigenous Amazonian people, shamans, ritualistic stuff like that, and then 1950s ethnobotanist discovers it, and there you go. So, hallucination that sort of covers the
premise of ayahuasca, and it's a very mystical experience. If any of your listeners have ever worked with this, but the thing that I found fascinating about it is that I went down with a very literal intention. I was going down to observe and to see what it would really do to my body. And you know, I didn't go down thinking, oh, I'm going to see angels, I'm going to see demons, and I wasn't sure what I was going to see. And I remember the second ceremony, in the middle of the night, I had to go to the restroom, and the restroom was across from the place that we were doing the ceremony. It was in the house across the lawn. And so I stumbled out into the middle of the night, and I was, you know, you're out of it. So it was probably 40 degrees. I didn't have any shoes on, and I just walked out into the grass with no shoes, no sweatshirt, nothing. And I remember looking up into the night sky, and it was a beautiful, clear night in Pisac, Peru. And it was, you know, there's no lights around. So
you're in the jungle, right?
No, actually, this was the Sacred Valley. So it wasn't in the jungle. It was in the Sacred Valley near Cusco. And so I looked up and I saw the entire Milky Way, which is probably only the second time in my life I've ever seen this. Wow. And I remember looking up, and there was an instantaneous awareness and knowing. And I said, it just came from like an instinctive place in my body. And I said, oh, that's me. I said, oh my God. And I was talking to the stars. I was looking up, talking to the stars. And I said, oh my God, I understand now. That's actually, I'm looking inside of myself. I'm looking, in a way, I thought, I'm looking at my history. And that's literally what we are looking at when we look out into this time machine. We're looking at where we were billions and billions and billions of years ago. Not just where we were, but who and what we were. Yeah. That is what we were. I mean, I really want to make that clear to people. That is literally what we were. Pieces of that.
At the elemental level. Like that is
yes,
what we
Stardust.
were. Exactly.
Stardust, that's what we were. And when I did that, instantaneously, when I made that connection, the entire Milky Way blinked. I know it sounds so weird, but it blinked and pulsated back to me. And there was a connection of energy and knowing and consciousness altering that occurred in that moment that I will never forget. It literally transformed my life because I made that connection. Yeah. And all of a sudden I realized this is the simulation. What I'm seeing is the simulation. It could be, this is morbid, but it could be just literally this simple. We could literally be hanging on, our consciousness, our belief of reality could literally be the last neuron firing in the death blows of some brain. Mm-hmm. And if you think of it that way, so it's the last neuron hanging on to all of its memories in a death blow, or it could be the first neuron being born in a brain. And that's what this reality could be.
How beautiful that is, though. I mean, I had that, not the exact same experience, but what I would think as that same subjective experience of expansion. And mine didn't happen on ayahuasca, though I did try that. And that'll be a discussion you and I will have at a later point, I'm sure, that ayahuasca, I had some sort of immunity to it. And everybody around me, they had the same mixture, and they definitely had their experiences, but I didn't happen to have any sort of intoxication or anything like that. But I did, under Terence McKenna's advice, do the heroic 5 dried grams in darkness. And I did that up on the top of a mountain. And oh, wow. Same thing. I found myself underneath the Milky Way. You couldn't even call it the Milky Way, though, because it was just so many stars. And I had a full awareness. I was looking at them, knowing the millions of light years that separated us. But I knew that photon that was hitting the back of my eye, my eyeball, that took in that photon, that was the end of that millions of years of journey from that star. Something from that star left the surface, traveled millions of years, and ended in my brain. And then I was able to actually put an understanding to that, knowing that distance. But having that knowledge collapsed that distance into an understanding that I felt as an expansion, that I was all of that was being perceived. And Carl Sagan's quote that we are a chance for the universe to know itself became literalized when I witnessed that I was the intersection for the universe to observe that distance.
It's that feeling of all of those connections all of a sudden making perfect sense.
Yeah.
In that 1 second.
Yeah.
That moment. It's an amazing
and for you
experience.
for you to be in the right place at the right time to capture just that one photon. We will never know, really, was that planned in the beginning? That is miraculous. Was that set in motion in the beginning of the Big Bang? Was that already known in the very moment that the universe was started? See, that is another polarity in my work, is I'm trying to figure out, do we have the ability to make a choice, or are our futures already set? Do we have a multiple set of futures in front of us, or is there just one future? Or is it all just happening all at the same time? Past, present, and future is all happening, and our consciousness is just moving through experience. So there is no past, present, and future. It's just our consciousness is moving through new experience. So there's a lot of there's a lot of questions there, right? What, when people say, well, what do you do? And I say I'm a futurist, and I have to go through this thing saying, well, I get people to think about the future and I get them involved in the future, but part of me also leaves them with the idea that the future may already be happening, and what you're really doing is tapping into, like, that moment of you seeing that star. Was that star, the photon itself, did it have some consciousness that it knew you already when it left the surface of that star, right? So is all of that information in the system, in the simulation, and we're just playing it out, or is it all happening at once? I mean, I really have a lot of...
I'll try to pull that into an extrapolation of current events, because simulation is seriously something that I think about daily, because I use it in the subjective sense, as in, I know when I wake up in the morning, I run a simulation of probable events that I have to manipulate through the world around me to have instantiated events. And so the language that I choose when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to accomplish this, I'm going to accomplish this, and then I follow through with action, allows me. So that we do simulate the world around us. So that's the practical application of this. But now let's talk about a more metaphysical side, as in, the greatest example is the new Oculus Rift. So when we have virtual reality technologies that allow us, combined with EEG, which I know you know a lot about, that we can move through these virtual worlds with our thoughts alone, and also create objects as if we're walking into a lucid dream that is created around us with our thoughts alone. What would the subjective sense of time be like when the world around you is subjected to thoughts? Mm-hmm. Like, remember in Inception, when she was walking through, changing the landscape with her mind
just
alone.
Thinking about it, yeah.
Industrial Light and Magic said that we are 10 years away from graphics that are indistinguishable from the world around us. And I have full confidence in that, and I know that the virtual reality technologies will be there. And so we will all have that Inception or Matrix-like plugging in moment just on the horizon. A few years away, we're going to have that. So that's when we can speculate that we are creating another simulation for us, for our consciousness to experience. So correlating that with our waking life that we experience now, with the probability in the future that we're going to have simulations that we're trying to speculate about right now, that's where that real question draws. Are we already in it? Is this turtles all the way down, that same old metaphor? I'm not sure. But we are going to have that moment of realization when we step into these virtual realities. Didn't I, last podcast I said that the distinction between virtual reality and reality is a resolution problem,
right?
And it's rapidly finding higher definition.
We're getting to that point, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is what I've been talking about with this idea of dream recorders. So the only thing that separates, because we have the technology now to see what the mind is seeing on a computer screen. We have that already. So the only problem is that the pixelation, the definition is
resolution,
not there, right? The resolution is not there. So that's you're right. That's the only thing that's separating us. And people have asked me a lot of different. They say, well, what's your predictions for the next 10 years or next 15 years? And a lot of these technologies, I keep saying, are going to happen in the next 10 years. I mean, having a functioning dream recorder in your house, a commercial dream recorder where you can go to sleep, record your dreams, and wake up and watch them, we're talking 10 years. And so it's interesting. So,
but we're not talking 10 years. We're talking right now. They have that technology. You can go to these labs, do one of these sleep analysis with these EEGs. They can extrapolate the visuals that you have in your cognition and then show you them the next morning. That's currently what you're saying, right?
But not the consumer
we
level.
have that in the laboratories, but I'm talking commercially available where anybody can get it from Walmart.
What will that do for design? I mean, think of the lag time right now having to draw. Like I have to do that all the time. As I've done graphic design for a long time, so I have to listen to people tell me what they want their logo to look like or those type of things, and they have to use language. They have to use their lips moving to try to give me the visual that's trapped behind their teeth. And that's not going to be the case anymore. So how is the imagination going to jump onto the exponential curve? Is the imagination going to become an information technology?
I think we're already in imagination. I mean, that's the whole idea of a simulation. I mean, simulation, using the word simulation is inaccurate because it's the only word. We know what it means, but it's not what's really happening when we talk about the simulation theory. To me, it is an imaginal sort of theory, right? So if you're imagining something, then it manifests. I mean, when I started out as an artist, and my teacher, she used to say, if you can't, she said, close your eyes, and she said, see what you want to draw. If you can't see your mind's eye, you can never draw it. And it took me from being a mediocre artist to being draw any face, any landscape with perfection because I could see it in my mind. And so that's how I sort of forecast futures, and that's sort of how I've lived my life is I imagine my world, and so we walk through and into that imagination. The difference between people like us, because we're talking about this idea of imagining our futures and living them and making them come to sort of a concrete realization, are the people who live in an illusion that they have no control of their imagination. That's really the difference. You meet these people all the time. You say, well, what stops you from getting what you want? Well, and they give you this whole list of ideas of like, I can't do this because of this, and I'm not pretty enough, I'm not skinny enough, but what you get down to is that they've never imagined their life the way they want it. They've never taken control of their own imagination. And so that's what I think the simulation really is. It's just the imagination. And if we imagine it, anything starts to unfold. It's almost like watching a transform, right? It literally is just transforming right in front of you if you can imagine the direction you want it to go in. And so when we talk about the simulation, my quest is to figure out, is there something intelligent creating that experience of the simulation, or is it just one intelligent, aware electron getting to know itself in the universe?
Maybe it's the side effect of consciousness.
Well, Terence McKenna had that great quote that we all walk in the condensations of our imaginations, and I think that you articulated that in a much deeper tone there. And I know that in my life, all the time, it's a laborious and at times annoying, but my girl and I, we work with each other's language. If I ever say I can't do that or anything like that, we eradicate that language because it is so limiting. So if we're running a simulation of our futures through our imaginations, the imagination is limited by the language that you use. So like you're saying, those insecurities saying that I'm too fat or I'm this or I'm that, all of those are absolutes that absolutely limit your ability to imagine a future probability that anyway, that leads me into why I actually chose the term techno-optimism, because people have this weird pessimism towards technology, and I want to imbue technology with optimism because it's been one of the most beneficial things to subjective humans, I think, ever. It's been always what keeps us warm at night, that connects us. Right now, you only exist in a digital sense, as in our thoughts meet in the noosphere, and that's all digital. It's all zeros and ones, and that's all mediated by technology.
And I've been actually saying, I know what you're saying about the noosphere, but I've been calling it the neurosphere.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
It literally is the neurosphere. It's the neurons talking to each other, even though we perceive ourselves as having this language. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the vibration. There is even when you're having conversations with people, there is a dialogue that's going on that is so complex and minute. It's the tone of the voice, it's the pattern of the voice, it's the way that the language is set up, the conversation itself. All of that, there is a subconscious, unconscious conversation going on between your neurons and my neurons right now that we're not aware of. That information is where the simulation resides. That information is, what do we do with that conversation, that subconscious conversation? What do we do with that information as we move about our lives after this encounter, right? And you do that all the time with people. You have a negative encounter with someone and you take that and your neurons have a battle of what to do with that. And then, 6 weeks later, you're standing in a store and someone in front of you is taking forever to pay for something. And then those neurons finally release whatever conversation was in your mind from that previous experience. Yeah. We have those types of conversations all the time. One of the things that I find fascinating is this idea of the human illusion syndrome. And this is fascinating to me.
Please go.
So how many times have you been around someone and, if you're open to all these ideas, obviously you're open to synchronicity and looking for patterns and all of that, right? So yes. How many times have we been with someone who maybe that's not their worldview? Maybe they're very practical, they're very literal, but something miraculous happens that both of you look at each other like, how in the world could that possibly happen? Numerically, it is the numbers are so high, it's impossible that this could happen, right? That you look at each other, you acknowledge it, they sort of brush it off, like, oh, well, whatever. You mention it to them a couple of weeks later, and they act like they don't remember what you're talking about.
Sure.
This happens all the time. There's a suppression of pattern that happens in the human psyche, and it's going on in the media, it's going on in humanity all over the world, all over the planet. It's probably going on all over the universe. But it's fascinating to me because people live under this blanket of the human illusion syndrome. They forget the miraculous. I'll give you an example. So I live in New York City, and after Hurricane Sandy came, I had to evacuate my apartment. I live on the west side, and our street was literally flooded. It was like 4 feet or 5 feet of water. So after a couple of days, I came back to my apartment, and I was sitting in the living room. The hallway light and the kitchen light were on, and there was a flicker. And I thought, oh, the power is about to go out again. Maybe I thought it was something to do with the Sandy still. And it flickered for a second, nothing happened, and 2 seconds later, the hallway light and the kitchen light went out. And I got up and I went over and I'm looking at, thinking, oh, the power must have gone out in the rest of the apartment. I checked the rest of the apartment, power's fine. And suddenly I look at the light switch, and the light switch had actually been turned down. Not just in the kitchen, but in the kitchen and the hallway. Now, I've talked to a couple of electricians about this. I don't think it's possible for a light surge or a power surge.
Are we talking a glitch in the matrix here?
I mean, this is what I'm talking about.
These
are the strange events.
Well, you told me in the first email back after you had emailed me about the podcast, and I said this is so synchronous, and you said no, it's just the simulation, and that rings so true to me. Ever since we've decided to upload, as in broadcast these thoughts out there, these what was used to be called the synchronicities. No, it's just part of the simulation. If you put your intention out there, you construct your language in a certain way that like minds, they interact, codons code, proteins bind. That's just what you're saying, the geometry. And when you get to the neural sphere, like you called it, right now we're interacting and we're mediated through that neural sphere. And we know that dendrites branch out and they connect. That's just the natural way of the world. So right now we're creating like an ethereal but true digital dendrite that is connecting us in Montana to you in New York, and that dendrite is going to be solidified in zeros and ones for other people to hear as well.
And speaking of all the synchronicity stuff, I never really started noticing it until I read David Pete's book Synchronicity, and then I read Dan Falk's In Search of Time, And then I solidified it all with Michael Talbot's The Holographic Universe. And I'll tell you, those 3 books completely changed my view on that. And every time something like that would happen, I was more aware of it. And I would say the word in my head, that was a synchronicity. And people around me are like, what? What? Did you just... Synchronicity. That's what
I want
that was.
I want to just, because we said it in the first one, and I think we should say it again, that simulation is very empowering when you can look at your perception of the world as an operating system. And so what you did with those 3 books was literally upgrade your operating system to allow you a filter to render synchronicities into your view. So you can actually see synchronicities as if it's overlaid, augmented in front of you. And I do that through the language I use. Using optimism literally constructs a rendering of the future probabilities with more synchronicities imbued in it.
When you see that day to day, the people that are negative attitude they carry this negative attitude, like they have that vibe
that becomes
about
their
them,
world.
And
that
it becomes they create that for themselves. So if you can become aware of that and,
how much have you seen that in your work? How much do you try to use optimism or just inflection, like you say, the power of language to cause a curse or to perform a miracle? I mean, how powerful is language in your own life there, Gray?
Yeah, we're talking about magic, right?
You could call it magic with the K, not the C,
Yeah, so, I spent a year before I started really working with, as a futurist, I spent a year studying the occult. Because I knew from all of my synchronicities that there was something going on in the universe that had not been explained. And I'm not an academic. I don't have an academic background. So I'm free to study whatever I want. And I'm free to write about whatever I want and speak about whatever I want, thankfully. And so once I studied this deep, deep year of the occult, going to the Great Pyramids in Egypt and doing a meditation in the King's Chamber and going to ayahuasca in Peru and studying this idea that there is some sort of information in the system, right? It's an anomalous information that exists in the system. I think it's there for a reason. It's in the simulation for a reason.
Is this like the Akashic records?
You could.
The parallel.
It has been
to
described as that, but
okay.
I wouldn't necessarily use that word because it's tied to Edgar Cayce and it's tied to a lineage there. I would use the idea that what we're really probably picking up on is chemical compounds in our DNA structure. That's literally probably what's happening. The same information that's in my body was in the body of my grandfather. There is no difference. The same DNA. You are nothing more than your mother and your father's DNA.
Yeah.
And then it branches out from there. She was nothing. The mother is nothing but her father and her mother. So there is a chemical DNA component that resides in our consciousness that we probably tap into, and it's probably part of this synchronicity. There are lots of ideas out there and theories of reality, theories of consciousness. You guys have touched on a couple of really fantastic books. The Holographic Universe was an amazing book. But the idea that we are tapping into some sort of hidden information that resides in our reality, part of it, I think, is a choice. I wake up in the morning and I think, nothing is impossible. I can do whatever I want, and I just have to figure out the right code, whether that's a code of language, whether that's a code of perception. You're literally just tapping into the simulation's code. And when you know the code, you can do whatever you want. And people don't understand that. They think, well, then if that's the case, I'm going to get my mansion, I'm going to get my boat, but that's not what I'm talking.
People instantly take it there to the secret, right? They instantly go like, "Well, make me rich then." Yeah. It's like that's not what.
But
it's
that's
about.
Not their fault. I'm not going to put the responsibility.
No,
hold on. I'm not going to put the responsibility of the masses' perception in their hands, because there is billions of dollars spent through advertisings and think tanks, and there's a small number with an agenda that literally pays for the people's attention to literally construct a perspective, a narrative that they dictate through the mainstream media. And so to put the responsibility of the masses' perspective that in their hands, I think, is missing the actual.
That's true too, right? Because you could find large groups of people that could go their whole lives without ever knowing synchronicity or any of the stuff that we're talking about. They can live a whole happy life.
He who controls
even
your eyes controls your mind. And right now, the 350 million Americans 350 million Americans, how many of those eyes are controlled by the mainstream? It's not real until Fox News or CNN or those type of things tells you the narrative.
But that's changing. That's what's so important about this, what we're doing,
it's
the platforms on the
empowering.
internet.
It's empowering subjective.
We're taking that back into our control and creating our own.
Exactly.
Well, what you're also looking for is intention. There's a couple of tools that I always sort of talk to people about and give them when I'm talking about looking into the future or trying to figure out what the patterns are and where we're going as a society or where the simulation is going. One of the tools is when you're looking at anything that you're looking at, there is an intention for attention, right? So the intention of attention is a certain spot in that ad or a certain spot in the placement in that commercial, right? So the girl is holding a Coke can, and so the intention of attention is look at my hand and look at this Coke can. And so the Coke can is moving left or right. But what you don't see in that scene is what's going on to the left, which is a guy riding by with a banner that says something subliminal, right? So I always tell people, stop looking where they want you to look and look at the perimeter. Look at what's going on around what their intention was. That's a very concrete, small example. But what I'm talking about is the entire human spectrum of attention. Why are we looking only at real events like, oh, there's a world outside my window called New York. There's a place that I live in called America. Those are intentions of attention. We have to look beyond that. There is something going on in our consciousness that's much bigger and much deeper and much more mysterious. And when we can tap into that, that's the simulation. And I think, studying the occult, like I said, for that year, there are definitely people that have tapped into the simulation and they know how to control it.
Aleister Crowley?
He would be someone
Manson.
that did it in a probably...
That's
I think
who
it
I
ended
was...
up becoming negative for him. But we could be talking about advertising companies.
Yeah.
I mean, they really understand the power of intention. They understand, and attention. They understand where to get the eye to look and why. Is it a distraction? Are they trying to add something to your consciousness, some sort of trigger, right?
Well, and look at how much they spend on that, researching it on websites, for example, where your eyes are looking, where the content's placed, where the ads are placed. It's a huge thing.
But you could actually see the father of it. The father of this was Edward Bernays, and I coined it in the last episode that the masses have been infected with a Bernaysian parasite, and that truly is what it is. If you look at language as memes, as organisms that exist in your psyche,
it gives new meaning to wake up.
Edward Bernays took direction from his uncle Freud, who deconstructed the human psyche, and then Edward Bernays was able to use language to attach your innate desires to inanimate objects.
Well, we see that daily. If you look in your Gmail spam folder, social engineering at work in getting you to click these links by triggering these emotional responses.
But that's feeding the Bernaysian parasite.
Exactly, right.
And what he's saying is that you can look past that. That is not the actual...
Once you're aware.
You are the petri dish that is your consciousness, not what is cultivating on the inside. If there is a parasite, that doesn't mean the culture is all bad. You just have to change the environment to eradicate that parasite, make the environment not hospitable for the Bernaysian parasite to actually
change
exist.
The business model.
So when I did that experiment with Fox News, I spent 6 months only looking at Fox News. That was my only medium for abstracting the world
around
around me.
We didn't hang out much then.
No, absolutely not.
At all.
I was in a bunker. I was storing rice.
He's doomsday prepping over here.
And that's what it was. And that's what
Isn't that scary though? Because that's what millions and millions and millions of people are all absorbing and manifesting,
it is scary.
collapsing.
But you know what? I want to say this though. We have to be really careful about going back to language. So the word parasite, I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying, but we have to be careful because when you use the word parasite, it has it in itself, it has a negative connotation.
Absolutely,
and so what it does is it makes people it triggers their amygdala. It makes them fearful of the information, and so it drives them away from the information. Instead, what we should be doing is, and I say this to everyone, you have to look at everything. You have to look at all the information, because hidden in the darkness is the answer. And a lot of people they're afraid to go to the darkness. They're afraid they'll be consumed or annihilated. You have to be able to walk into the darkness, gather the information that's necessary, and continue on your path. And some people it's a decision. They make a decision to be dark. They make a decision to live in fear. And it sounds like what the project that you guys are doing, I'm not interested in that. Evolution points us in the direction of progress. It does not point us in the direction of decay. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. The answer lies in progress, but within progress, there is darkness. Otherwise, we wouldn't know what berries to pick, because, without that darkness of people dying in our history of picking the wrong berries, we wouldn't be here. So you have to stay open to looking at the stuff that seems. That's why I studied the occult first before I started the futures study, is because I wanted to see what people were really fearful of, what they were trying to hide, what they were using, making a choice to use this information in a negative way to harm people. I wanted to see what that was, because without that knowledge, you can't protect yourself, and you can't protect your simulation of the universe. Yeah.
That's interesting. You bring up the occult. Like we're talking about mass media and putting the mind share out and multiplying it on television right now. I've noticed these shows. One of them's called the Cult, and then the other one's called The Following, and they both have that same premise of these rabid followers following this one individual that is manipulating or what have you, or a TV show in cults image, but. Yeah, it's interesting how that can affect people and bring them towards that
wanted
darkness.
to thank you, Gray, for actually calling me out on the parasite thing, because if I'm communicating to other people, my intention is to transfer information in that conversation.
When you can have good parasites.
Using the parasite analogy does have that negative connotation, but I use that negative connotation in my subjective life because I feel it's a parasite that I'm still battling with, as if it's a tapeworm. I struggle with it because I still find myself wanting, that Lamborghini, or wanting that really nice type of thing. It really is a powerful system inside of the brain. So I did use it with that negative connotation for my own assimilation of it.
You could almost change it to the Bernaysian symbiotic relationship site, or something more positive.
Yeah, there is
a context.
If I am communicating with someone that hadn't heard about Edward Bernays, there's a way that I can talk about him without using negative connotation. I think that's what Gray is saying there. That there is a way of communicating this information without striking the amygdala, because as soon as the amygdala is sparked, we've talked about that. Yep. It's defense. Like the cephalopod's ink spray. It just gets out of there, and when they get into the fight or flight, and they do not have the parts of the brain activated for rational thought. It shuts down.
So that's why I think, and I love the way that you phrased it, the Bernaysian parasite. It's a beautiful phrase, and it's a very powerful usage of language. But you can still use that phrase. You just have to follow it with that idea that you can work with the Bernaysian parasite, but you have to be aware of what you're dealing with. Yeah. That's the thing. We need people who are interested in parasites. We need people who are interested in dark places, because without that, humanity does not progress. We don't see progression. So, as a phrase, as a turn of a phrase, is beautiful. I would just suggest making sure that following it with that idea is important. But going back to this idea of controlling or tapping into the simulation and the code itself, right? It's very fascinating because, I could sit here and tell you my whole life story and people would say, you're a liar. There's no way that happened to you. From going from the South, living in a trailer in poverty, to being in New York and having the kind of career and the lifestyle that I've had now, people would say, well, how is that possible? And the only way, and I look at it and go, I don't understand how it's possible. The only way I think it's possible is that I never believed that I wasn't capable of it.
It's positivity, right? It was your positive frame of mind manifesting that reality that you wanted to work towards.
part of it was being positive, but it was also the potential is really what it was. It wasn't, I mean, because I knew it was going to be a rough road, because, and I've seen and been in situations where I thought, I don't know where this is leading. How is this helping my life to be dealing with these people, right? I've people talk about suffering fools, right? This idea that, you work with people in situations where you think, I mean, we see it all the time. People work in factories and their bosses, they know that their intelligence level is so much higher than their employers. And you really have to work towards moving beyond positivity and realizing, going back to what I was saying about the imagination, if you can imagine your life, that is a potential to happen. So, but you have to also this is something that's just recently happened to me. You have to commit all the way. And that's what's so fascinating about this idea of controlling the code or tapping into the code. Not only do you have to realize what the code is in the simulation, you have to accept fully that responsibility of being part of that code. So, and it sounds like, Kevin, that's what you're alluding to with the use of language, is that you're committing to the responsibility of the language, and that in itself is part of that simulation code.
Well, here's how in my own head, the visual that I have when I'm constructing my future is, my imagination allows me a blueprint, and an architect, the architect is my consciousness that's inside of the imagination. And I draw this blueprint of this inevitable building that will be constructed. But I have to take that and build it, or it'll just stay as a blueprint. While you're constructing it, like you said, there's times that you don't know where this is leading. Well, when you're halfway up and you're on the scaffolding and you're installing a window frame, do you have a perspective of the building that it will be? No. And so you could get, caught up in the building process. But when you are done and the scaffolding falls away and you're living in New York as this philosopher, this futurist, you get this new perspective that, wow, this is real. But we're linear thinkers. Like, our brain works that way. So the fact that when you go in the imagination, you become the architect, you make the blueprints, you send them off to the builders. The builders are what you do throughout the day. And then down the future, you're going to have that skyrise building, and you're going to be talking to people all around the world, from your skyrise.
Well, I would say this, the builders are not what you do during the day. The builders are your unconscious.
There you go.
The builders are your unconscious. And I want to tell you a story that's really fascinating. So
please.
I don't know if you guys knew this, but I used to be a photographer, and I travel all over the world to shoot. And I was in LA doing a job, and I was by myself in a hotel. And in LA, there are public access TV is like the best TV you've ever seen in your life. I mean, because all the people that have like fringe ideas live in LA for some reason. So the most interesting people in the world. So I had public access TV on in my hotel room. I was, it was late at night, probably like 11. And they had this guy on, and I can't remember his name, but he had created a tape recorder that would tape conversations and play them backwards, right? There's a whole study about this idea of backwards language, running language backwards. So he starts explaining his theory of how the unconscious mind has to form the sentence from the end of the sentence to the beginning for you to speak. And we know, and literally that is true. You have to know where you're going in a sentence to get to the end of the sentence.
Sure, yeah.
So your unconscious mind has started at the end and moved backwards. So the unconscious mind, just like your eyes, let's not forget that your vision in your brain is flipped upside down. So when you're seeing something in your brain, the brain is actually flipping it upside down.
Yeah.
So your unconscious mind could literally be moving backwards. Now, this is really going to mess your mind up. So when we talk about looking into the past of the universe, are we really, instead of, we have this idea that we're moving forward in some sort of forward concept. What if that's not the case?
Well,
what if they're actually moving backwards in time?
Didn't they prove that? Well,
what does that do for entropy?
For to be proven, didn't they have that study where they hooked people up to EEGs and I think fMRIs, and they showed a series of random images, and they would take the skin electrical data, galvanic skin response, that's what it's called, and then the EEG data or fMRI, and they would actually show that the body had a response between the conscious self and that lag time. They knew
the field.
They were they were doing
That's
they
the
had
one
to
where
choose
they were
right
showing
or left, or they had to choose true or false, something like that, that to make the study work. And the scientists that were recording the data were able to tell upwards of 5 to 10 seconds before the conscious individual participating in the study. The scientists knew before them what they were going to choose, upwards of 5 to 10 seconds. Did you run across that, Gray?
I know exactly what you're talking about. There are a couple of studies that talk about predictive response, right? So showing an image and someone being able to predict where the image was going to be on the screen or what the image was going to be. So there is some sort of connection.
Precognition.
Yeah, there is some sort of cognition. Now, what frightened me about this situation in Los Angeles when I saw this was that he explained his theory, which made sense to me, and I thought, okay, whatever. And then he played some of the current interviews from people that had been, like, for example, it was the Ramseys from the Jean Bonnet case.
Okay.
At the time, it was around that time, and he was talking about how there was an interview where the father and the mother had been interviewed right after, I think it was the day after, a couple of days after, and he played it on his tape recorder backwards, and it had all of these really bizarre phrases that related to the murder. And it was so obvious. You could hear it. It wasn't like you had to dig for it. You could hear the phrases, and it was connected almost like a metaphorical language to the situation that was being talked about in real time.
Wow.
It really, he did this 10 times on the show. It was like 10 different versions, and they all matched up. And I literally, this is so bizarre. It was the moment that I sort of peeled down that first layer of the human illusion syndrome. And I literally was like being in Twin Peaks where Bob is peeking over the bed. I literally was so frightened because my subconscious had suddenly become aware that of its process. It was suddenly like, oh, that's what's happening, that we are formulating our conversations. This is on a micro scale. My sentences are being formulated from the end to the beginning. And so I have this perception of where I'm going in my conversation before I get there. But what if that's how, on a bigger scale, what if that's how the universe is unfolding? Is that we are aware of the future, and we're just, so we know what's going to happen. We know what our future is going to be. And so we're just lining up. We're aligning our present consciousness to sort of match up with that.
More and more, I'm having that experience that I don't feel as if the things that I'm saying are mine necessarily. A lot of the times I would just say, look, I'm downloading. I don't know where this is coming from. I'm not even sure if it makes sense. You let me know after I'm done spewing this, because I at times do not know how it's being constructed or really understand where it's going. It's as if we call it, my family likes to dub it that I have these trains, and I'm Grand Central, and there's just thousands of trains going every different way. And I finally was able to have a woman that was the conductor. And so she actually, puts timestamps, and she directs these types of trains. And that type of experience of having those trains is I'm riding that train with it. I have no idea the destination, and I don't feel it's mine. I feel as if the word possession comes to mind, but it's not accurate of the experience. Joe Rogan, the comedian, he likes to say that when he's on stage, he's doing it as well. He's
channeling.
He's just channeling almost whatever it is. He says it comes from the ether, and everybody's there. And, he's just a conduit for the universe to speak through. And that's something that I think we all fall into. And in your subjective experience, do you feel that same type of pull? Are you a conduit at times?
Absolutely. I mean, there are times when I when I'm really in, I hate to use the word flow, but that's exactly what it's been dubbed the flow. But you get into this idea of flowing with the current of humanity, right? So we're in some sort of current, whether that's an energy field, energy spectrum, and you get into that current. And when you're comfortable in that current, and you're not trying to intentionally predict what you need to do next. When that drops away, when you get to the place where you're comfortable with not predicting your next move, that's where the flow of energy sort of comes. And so I can definitely get into those states. The disruptors for that state are ego. Sometimes I found that the disruption for those states come when doubt comes, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Ego and doubt are definitely two of the places where it disrupts that flow. So it sort of pulls you out of that unconscious connection. I don't necessarily, possession would be something that language was formed through a religious, I don't want to use the word cult, but it was definitely positioned as a tool within the religious community. So possession, the reference of it I understand, but I would say it's more that what's happening is that you're tapping into the conversation that is happening in that neuronal sphere, that something that you've picked up on. Because think of the information that we get every day as we walk through our cities and our towns.
Yeah.
You hear things and see things that you're not aware of. They just get imprinted on you.
Yeah.
And your neurons are constantly going, speaking Russian. It's like, imagine, you spend 2 weeks in Paris and you don't speak French. And then you wake up, 2 months later having a conversation in French to your partner. It's like, how is that possible? Well, the neurons have picked up that information. Your unconscious mind has picked up and absorbed all sorts of information.
Sure.
So the flow of that idea of possession is really just you're allowing your unconscious mind to come to the surface. And that's where the real magic happens. That's where buildings get built. That's where bridges get built. That's where people get sent to Mars. Wow. That's what's so amazing.
Yeah. That's that old saying, just go with the flow, man.
Just go with the flow.
Go with the flow. It's almost a Buddha type of state of living in that moment, letting go of everything and just be.
Well, I would say instead of Buddhist, because that still has a lot of religious tones. But if you went with the Tao is not necessarily dualist, and I think that's
Tao
more
of physics.
No, the Tao.
I know.
So it's
another good book. Just sorry.
There you go. The Tao of physics. Right.
Okay.
Great.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
You speak a lot about vibrations and stuff. Are you into the whole string theory, or are you more of an M theory, or where do you stand on that? I was just kind of curious.
Well, this is interesting, the whole idea of string theory, because what I find fascinating is that if energy itself, right, if the energy in the universe itself is information at its core, then we can trace everything that we've ever experienced through the sun's energy. We can trace everything through every star that's in the universe. And so there's a lot of information when we talk about string theory. There's a guy, I can't remember his name now, but he's a string theorist. Actually, probably wouldn't appreciate me talking about this theory. But he's the one that came out with it, and he said that he's a string theorist, and said that he is finding code
Professor
that resembles.
Gates.
Who are you going to say?
Professor Gates, right?
I don't remember his name, but he was saying that they're finding code that resembles what you find in corrective code in computer.
It's self-correcting error code. Yeah, it was
Professor
Gates.
Yes.
James Gates.
Neil deGrasse Tyson was the one who was interviewing when he said that, and it's actual strings of ones and zeros. And not just strings of ones and zeros. These are self-correcting error codes that were established by, I believe, Claude Shannon in the 40s. And this is some of the base when you are going to start creating computer models to process information. That's what this code does. So just like we found the TCP protocols with ants communicating through the pheromone release,
right.
like
Chemical,
we found, their chemical release is the exact same as the TCP protocols to move packets across the internet.
It's just shuffling information.
Amazing. Now, see, the question is, did we see? This goes back to the biological algorithm. Did we unconsciously know that system was in place in nature already, and we just we literally just manifested it to create the computer systems? Because when we talk about mushroom mycelium and we look at that structure, and you look at the universal structure and you look at neurons, it's all the same structure.
And tree root structure. I mean, we dabble in amateur mycology, and if you watch the mycelium grow around the substrate, it's literally like filaments of fingertips reaching out to connect with each other.
Or globular structures, that are combining through dark matter. Yeah, you see it. The macro becomes the micro. But what's beautiful is that we sit with the ability to perceive both.
By being the observer, we can
observe both the macro and the micro.
That's where I just kept going. Every time you would say vibration, like I kept going to this string theory, and if everything's a vibration and we're talking, creating it, like it's all just this...
Kevin Kelly says that we sit at the precipice of the born and the made. Yep. And I think that that's just so beautiful because we sit in our imaginations, and then we can choose to let those ideas gestate and then be birthed through our fingertips.
Well, let's assume that time is moving in this forward progression, which could literally be an illusion, but let's just assume that this is correct. What I find fascinating is that technology has always been there, right? Technology has always been there. I mean, from the moment that the first star was born, every movement in the cosmos has created some sort of pattern. You could map it with numbers. You could map it with geometry. That was the primary base for technology. So the cosmos itself is a piece of technology, and so that lineage of birthing technology may be something that is very common throughout the universe, just as mycelium, the pattern of mycelium, neuron patterns, and universal patterns are all connected. The idea that humanity is birthing technology may be something that every extraterrestrial advanced civilization has gone through in their past as well. It may be something that is very common in the universe. So the real question when we talk about the simulation, let's take this even further down the rabbit hole. Is the universe a machine? Is the universe some sort of mechanical substrate? And this birthing process of going through waves of organic into technology, mechanical, back into organic, is that process going on in the entire universe? And if it is, then what we're really dealing with is we are inside of some sort of mechanical, digitized organism that is manifesting its own self. Just like the brain having the structure of the mycelium, viewing the mycelium in nature, there is no difference. So if this computer organic creature is becoming aware of Earth, then it will suddenly view Earth, and what will pop out of Earth? A mechanical representation of itself. And that's maybe what is happening is people say, well, the universe is becoming aware of itself. Well, if that's the case, then the proof is in the pudding that the universe, if you look at what's going on with technology on this planet, the proof is there. The universe is a machine. If it's manifesting what it knows itself to be, then that is the proof.
And then it's no accident then that code is what code is, and these registrars and computer electronics, like they work the way they do because that's the foundation, that's the basis of it.
Did you jump into the Terence McKenna when he talked about mycelium being spores that were coded by advanced intelligences with information? So I'll just break it down as quickly as possible. So currently, right now, we're manipulating our genetic code where we've taken it and created an information technology that can code DNA with specific information that could be later replicated. And so we're constantly doing that in the laboratory now and in garages with BioBlocks and such. So we know that advanced civilizations are going to be doing that. Well, what if Terence McKenna speculated that a spore would be the ideal ideal capsule, like an information time capsule,
to transmit the information
that could piggyback like panspermia on the back of asteroids and then seed the universe. And so just think of spraying these spores out into the universe that would be collected by meteors or collected by that, and then they would hit down on any type of ecosystem that it could then spread as mycelium.
So we have two choices here.
Prometheus.
Either the universe is a machine or it's a mushroom. I mean, really...
Well, information is still the base for that, and we are information processors through our neurology. And when we introduce something like mycelium with that information inherent in it, it changes our perception of the universe.
It's everything. It's both until the observer
what it does
and picks one or the other.
If you think of to be intelligent or to be conscious is to process information, and you can ingest something that changes changes the way you process information of the external world, to the fact that it has completely changed my life, changed my perception for the rest of my life. I think, ingesting this, taking this information in the form of a mushroom, it's changed my perception. The way I literally process information is now different. He speculates that could have come from the stars, and so that's where panspermia comes in. How do you do that? So when mycelium goes throughout your nervous system, it changes your perception. And for the Johns Hopkins and a number of other universities are saying that
the psilocybin, not the
psilocybin,
mycelium.
Or the psilocybin through these Johns Hopkins studies are showing that it alleviates death anxiety. It makes you a better person. That's what they're saying. It literally makes you a better person. So this isn't the hippie movement anymore.
No, they were doing studies with that with PTSD and all sorts. It's almost like a tool. If we're these beings that are manipulating this mechanically, that's the tool.
I would say
it
is a tool to change your information processing in a way that's more coherent with the world around us. It unlocks
levels that you normally wouldn't be a part of or coherent of.
So if there is a substrate, it more than likely is some sort of mycelium substrate. I mean, we know that for a fact already. I mean, anybody who's denying that has not looked at the structure of the universe. It looks like a mycelium structure. Yeah. So, and that's just the piece that we can see. I mean, I'm talking about the furthest view of our universe, our visible universe. The structure of the star systems look like a mycelium structure.
Well, you see this in those galaxy nurseries that the astronomers are seeing how galaxies are forming and everything. It's the same thing.
It's the same structure. So, but that's the same way the brain forms. See, this is what I'm saying about the reflection, the universe reflecting on the brain reflecting on the universe. Is it literally the same exact thing? And so, I mean, I'm being humorous when I talk about the idea of the universe being a mushroom, but in a way, we really don't, we really still don't have an idea of what the universe is. I mean, we asked this question earlier in the interview, but I want to have some sort of debate with people over this idea of what is the universe. It can't just be a star with some planets rotating around it. It can't be, and a cluster of those and a cluster of galaxies and it has to have a structure that we can get our ideas around, that we can sort of wrap our brain around. And humanity is just now starting to understand what the universe looks like. So the next stage is sort of figuring out what it really is.
Yeah.
Is it really a reflection of our past brain? Is it a collective brain from the past that we're looking at? I mean, and when I said earlier, when the idea of what we're experiencing could literally be the last neuron firing or the first neuron firing, I was being literal about that. It could literally be, our perception could literally be just that one first neuron or the last neuron in the brain perceiving itself as a whole. So it's very fascinating to wrap your head around what is the universe, because from that point, that's the biggest thing we can think of right now. We don't know what's outside of the universe, if there is anything outside of the universe. But from that point, you can work with the different levels, because the next level down from the universe is the brain. The next level down from the brain is the micro that we see in nature, right? The structures that we see in nature. And then from there, you can go down into the atoms, electrons, and all that.
Well, and speaking about the structure, did you see the pictures that recently came out from the Massachusetts hospital? They were doing the brain scanning, and that's exactly what it looks like. When you look at these scans, it's filament, it's mycelium.
The connectome,
Isn't that, that blew my mind when I first saw that. It's alien almost to look at. It's like, that's in us.
Well, I think it's beautiful that you're correlating the universe as a mirror for us to perceive ourselves in. And I think that how we perceive that mirror, and so if I have one in front of me, it's up to the language that I use. And here's where I'll talk about how perception can be changed so dramatically in a subjective sense with introducing a new chemical. I decided to do that shamanic type of journey with the advocation of Terence McKenna with the 5 dried grams. And I did it alone. I did it in the shamanic fashion by fasting and taking, a long time of meditation and all of those, getting my environment
preparation
prepared for this. And I had never done anything like this. It was so foreign to me, but I knew through study that this has been a type of revelatory an awakening type of experience that is promised if done in the right setting and such.
The right frame of mind.
So I took that advice and I did ingest this, and I had the visual acuity, I had those type of things, I had the logos invocation that was able to analyze the thoughts that I was having, and it was very calm and soothing, and it allowed myself to not be so critical of myself. But I remember walking back inside, I needed to go to the bathroom, and I looked at the mirror, and a lot of people say never do that. But what it did for me is it showed me who I was, how you would see me, not how I would tell you. When I looked at the mirror the day before, I saw justifications. I saw, I'm not a lazy person. I'm just really busy, so I'll run tomorrow. I'll change my diet next week. I'll do all that. And I was 350 pounds, but my reflection I saw in that mirror was not 300 pounds. It was the justifications, the rationalizations, and all of those things that literally hindered my view in that mirror. And so when I had the psilocybin, it shattered the illusion of what I thought I was in the mirror. Ego and it showed me how you would see me. Right. But it was comforting when it did that. And it showed me a future if I made these certain changes. It showed me that future with comfort, it was like
a warmth. Almost.
It was that warmth. It showed me a future that was not periled with fear and anxiety and doubt.
It showed you the optimistic future rather than the pessimistic future.
And I mean, a year later, I was doing the Ironman.
Yeah,
the triathlon. That's how dramatically introduction of a new information processing chemical in the brain, or taking your brain and introducing it to a new way of processing information around you, can give you a new view of that mirror. And so when you say that the universe is like a mirror, the more we look up and the more we understand, is the reflection becoming more clear that the universe is us, but it's also within us. Like that, we're getting a more true reflection of the world around us.
It's a fractal. I mean, the closer you look, the more you're going to see the exact same thing.
The Mandelbrot set,
yeah. So, I completely understand what you're saying, and I've had moments like that, especially on the ayahuasca. I went through death experiences. I went through self-hatred experiences. I went through parental disappointment experiences.
Did it seem like to you that it was trying to show you things that you could have closure on and then move on, so that you could further this path that you were traveling on, but you couldn't progress to the next level until you dealt with certain things within yourself?
Yes, it's going back to coding the simulation. It's like when you're learning to code computer language, until you learn the first algorithm, you can't move on to the second one, right? So I knew that when I was going down that part of my work was going to be to resolve some of the blocks that had kept me from really realizing my imagination and my realizing the imaginal world that I wanted to live in, right?
Yeah.
It's debug.
And so when I this is a pretty amazing experience. So, when you're having this experience with ayahuasca, there is a purge that happens that everybody talks about. So
La purge.
You vomit, right? So they give you for us, they gave us buckets, and they said, keep your bucket close because at a certain point you'll feel like you have to vomit, and most people do purge. And so I was fighting the purge for the first couple of hours. I really didn't feel like I needed to do it. And eventually, when it finally came, it only happened because there were 4 musicians that were playing in the room with us. And there was this one woman who had the most beautiful voice I've ever heard, literally. And she was playing a harp, which it sounds hokey. It sounds really hokey, but it was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And she came really close to me. I was having a hard time getting the purge to be final. And so when she came closer to me, the closer she came to me, the more I felt my emotions sort of rising. And it was like this motherly, beautiful motherly thing that I'd always needed that I never had. And so I purged, I was holding this bucket, and there was a moment at the very end of the purge where I was really heaving, and I literally saw a big black scorpion come out of my mouth.
Wow.
And I thought, at the moment it freaked me out because I thought, of course I've been fasting for 4 days. I was like, how did that get inside of me? And
while I was sleeping, what the hell?
I was sleeping, a big giant black scorpion crawled in my mouth. But I saw this enormous black scorpion come out. I saw the stomach region, the tail. It was very shiny, and it went into the bucket. And I kept thinking, how is this possible? How was I carrying around this enormous scorpion inside of me?
What was the definition? Like, if you could give me it, because I'm not a visual person, nor have I ever hallucinated. In the type of psychedelics, I've done the 5 dried grams, I've done those type of things, but my brain, I don't know if it's that I'm left-handed. That'll be I'll call you, and we'll have that conversation of the speculation why I don't hallucinate. But I've had the logos, I've had auditory type hallucinations, so I'm always fascinated when people have visuals, like, what was it like to look at that scorpion in definitions? Give me an IMAX extrapolation of what you were seeing.
So I just remember looking at the bucket, which I think was red, and it was dark inside the room because all the lights are out, but you can see how your eyes adjust to the dark.
Yeah.
And I just remember it was an awareness, sort of a metaphorical awareness of what it was first. That was the first thing that came. Mm-hmm. And then my brain started to form the vision of this thing. So it was almost as if my unconscious mind was, here's the metaphor, and now I'm going to let your visual imagination create the rest. Okay. That's the process that happened.
And that's what our brains do day to day. They just spend all of their time filling in these gaps in our...
What was the definition, if you could give me a clarity of when you actually had your visual representation of that metaphor instantiate in the form of the scorpion? What do you mean?
Like, what did it represent for you?
Well, no. I mean, because I'm not visual, I wanted to see the definition of a hallucination. Was it lifelike?
Oh, okay, I got you. Yeah. So I would say it was as real as, and that's what freaked me out, is that I was having trouble realizing if it was real.
Oh, okay.
It was literally tangible. It had 3 dimensions. I could see the reflection of the window on the glossy undertone of its belly. I could see its little claws. I could see everything.
Was the feeling there? Was there tactile? Like, did you feel it, or was it more of a visual?
No, visual.
It literally, the part that really upset me was that the tail, the stinger, was really huge. And I had a hard time. It sounds so awful. I had a hard time getting the stinger to come out of my mouth. But it lasts for like a couple of seconds. It's just one of those things where you're like, "Oh my god, that was a scorpion!" and it's in the bucket. And so the representation of what that was this idea that I had never. And the other part of this hallucination or experience was that when I was heaving and having this experience, I heard my mother's voice and I heard my father's voice come out of me. And I thought, oh, the scorpion can sting itself. The idea that we do the most damage to ourselves, right? That is what it represented for me. And what I had never realized, because my parents divorced when I was 5, and they always battled using me. You know, they hated each other more than they loved me, is what I always say to people.
Wow.
And it was this realization from hearing my father's voice and my mother's voice that I had always tried to be one or other. You know, either I'd always tried to be my father or I'd always tried to be my mother in some sort of way. And it was the first realization that was the scorpion stinging itself this whole time. And I had finally I'd literally evacuated that emotional metaphor, and it was out of me.
That is beautiful.
And it was amazing. I mean, I mourned. It was black too, so of course there's this idea of mourning.
Yeah.
But I was mourning the idea that I could let go of trying to be my parents. I could be myself. I could be an autonomous individual that had my own future ahead of me. I didn't have to live a future that they wanted to live. And I could have my own future.
After that realization, that allowed you to move forward and manifest your own future through these actions and everything. You just had to get that out of your system, basically.
Well, you know, from the moment I stepped off the plane from my trip to Peru, it was like nonstop action movie, right? I mean, it was like, you know, ideas were sort of these cars blowing up. You know, it was like ideas were manifesting. People, I was drawing people to me so quickly. I could think about it in the morning, and by 12 o'clock, the person would call. It's like your email when you and I, Kevin, when you and I emailed. It's this amazing idea that I was looking on my Facebook page. I saw a post. I went to the page. I saw the show. I went to the show, and then immediately I thought, this is right. I should do this. There was some sort of knowing in my unconscious. I was like, do it and do it now. And so when I sent you the email and you sent back to me, that's so synchronistic that, you know, you told me the situation that happened.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, it's really just that I had tapped into the clarity of my unconscious mind. But I do believe that the unconscious is connected to the future, or whatever it means. When I say the word future, I still have a hard time clarifying what that means.
It's a hard definition.
It is. So if we tap into that idea of the future, and you know, moving away from the psychedelic conversation, I want to talk about the future for a second.
Yes,
I want to
please.
talk about
we can wrap it up on let's move into the future, and then we'll just end. I think we're at an hour and a half already.
Yeah,
but that's still beautiful. It'll be a long one, hour and 42 minutes.
We got time.
Wow.
Yeah, we got time.
So let's talk about the future, and let's talk about what does the future look like? What will the future be like for human beings on this planet in the year 2050 or beyond that?
Yeah.
So my vision and my imagination of the future is a future that is full of empathy. And we see that as a fact. We know that the empathy on this planet is growing. Otherwise, Egypt would have never happened.
Yeah.
The uprising in Egypt and the response to the uprising in Egypt would have never happened. Occupy Wall Street would have never happened without the growth of empathy. All of the structures that are falling that have been negative, corporations that have been forced to do what's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, whether we're talking about gay marriage or whether we're talking about a woman's right to her body, all of these issues, all of that is going to fall away because when people have empathy, and if you're a white male Christian in this country, if you don't have the empathy to realize what it's like to be a woman, then you're in the wrong boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
The growth of empathy in the future is going to be enormous. And so we're going to see less wars. I mean, David Kelly talked about this in his book. It wasn't What Technology Wants. It was Abundance talked about this.
Peter Diamandis, yeah.
Yes. So that book is amazing because it really shows you that we are getting better. Empathy is growing in this planet. The more we're connected with mobile devices, whether that be handheld or whether that be a Google Glass sort of headset, EEG headset, whatever it is, whatever the hardware is, the effect on consciousness in the future will be greater empathy. Of course, you always have psychopaths. It's a biological issue. You will always have people that want to see the world burn. but you will always have a greater sense of empathy because that's what evolution does. It progresses, right?
Well, the actual statistics, though, going off of the pinkers and those type of things, that the chances of dying at the hands of another man are lower than they've ever been. And I've made the correlation that social medias is literally the technological version of the neurological empathetic mirror neuron network. So the structure in the brain that allows me to empathize with people around me has been manifest in the form of Facebook and those type of things, and the Twitters that literally cause revolutions, allowing people to have that empathy across these networks.
Absolutely, because it's connected us to people we've never... It's connected neurons to other neurons that would never have understood each other, right? So how does the neuron set in a girl in Africa who has been starving most of her life, how does her neuron set also connect with an Upper East Side woman who's a millionaire? When those two neuron sets start to communicate, that's what we're seeing on this planet. And so you're going to see an increase in empathy. We're going to see an increase in efficiency. Now, this is what's so beautiful. Now we're talking about the literal world, whether it's an illusion or not. The illusion is becoming more efficient.
Yeah.
So, So you're going to see in the cities, you're going to see vertical farms, which I think is amazing, that are completely efficient, solar powered, recycled rainwater, the whole thing. You're going to see that in the cities. I do think people have been projecting all these horrible things that are going to happen to our planet and the weather system, but I think we will see a cycle of the weather that's enormously disruptive because we've done so much damage. Mm-hmm. But I think in the next 10 years, because of the awareness that we need to change what we're doing, we will see that reverse over time. So I don't think that it's like, hurricanes every 5 minutes in our future. It may be a very rough cycle that we're going to go through, but I think it is going to eventually calm and reverse.
I like Terence McKenna's view that these are birthing pains. He made the analogy that if you had no idea about a pregnancy and a birth process, and you were just walking around a corner and you saw a woman giving labor, there is nothing beautiful about that. That is, call somebody. There's blood. Right. There's screaming.
There's
get some help. And I think that's the same thing that's happening with the connection of the neural sphere. I'm always going to say that instead of the noosphere. With connecting the global brain, it's atrophying those latent systems like the amygdala. The amygdala is one of the pinnacles of the brain that has caused us to be protected, for so long in the world around us. But right now it's causing a lot of cognitive dissonance because the world around us is not the scary place that it once was. We don't need the linear projecting where the lion is going to attack us anymore, because we have the higher parts of the brain that allow us to have an imagination that sends us to the stars, that sends us to Mars.
Mm-hmm. So I'll tell you just on some practical terms, some of my predictions for the future.
Please,
the first one is we won't have flying cars because for two reasons. First, to fly a car, you need a runway, and there's not enough space to land and take off.
No VTOL cars.
So So, and the other thing is that we don't have. As of right now, we don't have the kind of capacity for fuel in the cars to lift off and fly and just hover when you want to go get a pizza around the corner. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, instead of flying cars, we're going to see floating cars. It's a very specific distinction. And if your listeners, and you guys can look into this too, the military is bringing back airships. And they're bringing them back with helium, which I think is amazing. So it's compressed helium that can lift up tons and tons of weight.
Boeing,
so we're talking...
Yeah, they had that big whale blimp. Did you guys see that?
Yes.
That was so incredible. I can't wait for that. You're so right with correlate. Yeah, the floating versus the flying. I never thought that too. As the futurist, I'm sure you get this all the time. Where's the flying cars? Yeah, come on. Where's the... And it's like...
People don't think about even the rocket equation, like how much fuel you need to get weight in the air.
But again, that is such a limited, imaginative type of future. To flying cars, I'm sorry, I don't want to be in charge of flying a car.
But
that's
you see
very
where that
risky.
comes from, right? That's sci-fi in media.
Sure, and that's their limited imagination of future probabilities, given what the sci-fi writers wrote about back in the day. They never thought that we would have iPhones. They never thought that the power of a smartphone would be in the hands of, these children in Africa. That they have more power in their hands than the president did 10 years ago. Like that's an incredible achievement where people like to go to the flying cars analogy. But floating cars, you're right. That is very achievable. Please continue.
So it's amazing because I think what's going to happen is you'll have smaller versions of the military versions of these huge airships. And so it will use a small amount of compressed helium to float the structure. And when I say structure, people assume, well, yeah, but you can't do it because the car is going to, the structure itself is going to weigh tons and tons. Well, China just came out with a carbon material that's lighter than air. I mean, you can float it. You can literally put this a block of it on a feather. So we're going to see carbon composites that are extremely light. We're going to see compressed helium, and we're going to have floating cars. Now, the great thing about floating cars is you don't have to worry about it falling. Because a flying car, if the engine goes out, you're kind of screwed. Yeah. So floating cars, you could literally hover with no power usage whatsoever, except if you wanted to stabilize it, you would have to have some sort of power source to push air around the vehicle itself. But that could easily be done with solar. Now, or ion movement, wind movement. You could see that as well. So we're talking about seeing a future with floating cars. So we're talking about the end of the tire industry. So if anyone out there listening is invested in tires, you should really get your money out now. And I think that's going to be a huge social change that we see, because how will that affect roadways? Will we still need roadways if we have floating cars that can literally float over forests? We could start seeing huge forests grow up in the cities because you don't need to have roadways. You could see docking stations that were at the top of buildings instead of the bottom of the buildings. So it could really change the transformation and transform the idea of architecture in cities.
Do you feel like the whole Google self-driving car experiments and stuff will be incorporated into
Forbes
this so
article.
that you'll have a self-driving floating car?
Did you happen to read that Forbes article about Google's $1 trillion car?
I didn't, but I know a lot about the self-driving car, and really the self-driving part of this is what's important, not the car, because you could put that self-driving on anything. The technology could be put on a boat and control the motor. So it really is just about controlling
automation.
It's automating movement is what it is. Right. And so you could literally put that system on a floating car and it could do the exact same thing.
And that's where I was trying to relate to your idea with this Forbes article that came out, because it literally blew my mind, because it shows you they did and this has already been approved in a number of states. So this is happening with Google right now, that their self-driving cars have already racked up over 1 million miles. They're safer than any human driver. Yeah. But they said that what will happen is, all the taxi cabs in New York, this is prevalent to your situation there, Gray, that they could take, and I want to say it was like 20,000, don't quote me on the number, but it was a very small number of Google cars that would eliminate all taxis.
Well, the idea is that when you own a car, the majority of that car's life is spent being parked. So if you could remove that from the society and say that when you need the car, it will be there to take you where you need to go, and when it drops you off, it goes to its next thing. And so you have the communal owning of one or two vehicles rather than each person having two
They
vehicles.
equate it to about 8 cents per mile right now.
It changes everything.
So right now, what's a taxi cab rate there in New York?
To get in, it's $250, and then I don't know what the...
Wait, they have a get-in charge?
Oh,
Cover
yeah, it's
charge.
$250, I think.
Cover
Oh,
charge
my
at the
God.
door.
Okay, so right now the Google car I think is around 8 to 10 cents per mile.
Wow.
With the current ones, that systems that are in place that are being tested in these other
as
states
technology
right now.
grows, the LiDAR and everything, it'll get condensed. Everything will get smaller.
But what
and
he's
cheaper.
saying is that I would say the next step of this is, yes, in the next 2 to 3 years is when they predict Google Car will be ubiquitous throughout the countries.
It's like Zipcar, you
And
know?
so, well, that's what they're doing. Zipcar
idea,
is actually trying to get the Google cars and team up with them. But he's saying that we're going to transcend the limitations of roadways with floating cars, and how that will actually become viable, I feel, is through Google's algorithm to be able to autonomously move your body with enough safety that we could actually be in the air.
Traffic
because
models.
right
You're
now,
running
I don't trust the American public with flying cars. So their
I don't
want
either.
for
I
those...
I don't
don't
trust them with flying anything.
I don't.
Let's be honest.
I barely
here.
trust them on the highways.
I know.
So,
my goodness.
so these floating cars combined with the Google algorithms to move your vessel through this, I think is absolutely on the way to that utopia. What do you think besides transportation? What do you think the average? Do you think that abundance is going to be that liberating factor, that we're not going to see the resource scarcity wars and those type of things that are currently plaguing our society?
I don't think so, because everything's going to be automated. I mean, this is what I don't understand about the political system right now, because there's this war going on with the minds of Americans right now. That you know, I heard a politician say, Americans want to work really hard, and I was like,
what does that even
I don't know who
mean?
you're talking about, but I don't want to work really hard. I want to be walking on the beaches of the islands of Maldives right now. I mean, who wants to work hard?
It tells me if you're working super hard, there's something inefficient about how you're working.
That's exactly what I thought too. I thought inefficiency is what they're selling, because inefficiency keeps people distracted.
They have to create a problem to then create the solution to then swoop in and save the day. It's
so automation is this idea that the amygdala pushers are really trying to push, right?
Amygdala pushers.
I like amygdala
That's coined.
pushers. Brilliant.
I mean, it's this idea that let's make everyone afraid that they're going to lose their jobs. And well, I'm sorry, you've worked in a factory for the last 30 years. Or you clean toilets for a living, or you drive a truck. My grandfather drove a truck his whole life. It disrupted our family. It kept him away from our home. He was unhappy. He suffered all sorts of physical ailments because of driving this truck for however many years. Yeah. And so if we can automate all of these systems, the real question is for the future is, and there is no doubt, everything will be automated. We are headed towards that.
Well, and think of what that does just by freeing up all of that mind attention that's focused on, like, oh, I have to go to work, I have to drive for 8 hours, or whatever you happen to be doing. Like, if the normal 8 to 5, 9 to 5 individual could spend those 8 hours a day doing what they really wanted or what really mattered.
When human attention, the allocation of human attention is not being collected and diverted and manipulated.
It's not being used efficiently.
Well, it is it's very efficient, and but for a small number with agendas. And what he's saying is that the future is going to liberate human attention allocation and give them the freedom to divert it wherever they feel. And I don't feel it's right to necessarily judge people on how they spend their attention and where they spend that throughout
Sometimes
the days.
it's necessity. Sure.
Right now, we're in a state of limbo as far as what is right to divert your attention. Is it Honey Boo Boo? Is it Charlie Sheen? Is it Desperate Housewives? Or is it the universe? Is it Terrence McKenna? What is right? What is the right area in which to divert your attention? Consumer capitalism would tell you that it's a 9 to 5, that it's being an upstanding person, right? that it's being Democrat or it's being Republican. These are the narratives that they give you, in which you then
choose from.
That you literally install that.
That's what you need to
and then
create
your
your
attention
own.
goes into perpetuating that narrative that's given to you. What he's saying is that we're in an open source state of cognition, and that's causing a lot of dissonance, but it's going to
Disruption.
the foundation of automation is actually going to liberate that human attention, that I feel that we're all going to be walking on the beaches doing whatever we feel is what resonates best with us. The curiosity, the imagination,
individually and as a whole.
And I would like to also say, or to solidify and to regurgitate him saying that the empathy, that's the big thing that we need to remember, is we're not going to bring the same amygdala thinking, that same limbic type of thinking in the future with us, because the empathy is being empowered through these social networks. We are we're letting it atrophy like the appendix. We just don't need it anymore. We're not scared of the polar bears. We're not scared of those things. We've created technologies that shield us from that.
The polar bears are scared of us right now because their house is getting quite small.
Yeah, it's true. They're losing their land. Well, it's fascinating too, because I don't want to come off by saying, well, you shouldn't work in a factory and you shouldn't do this. And listen, if your heart's desire, and my mother worked in a factory. If your heart's desire is to work in a factory, and I don't know anybody who has that heart's desire, then fine, we will create factories for you so that you can just go hang out and work in. That's fine. But I don't think there are a lot of people that want to work 12 to 18 hours a day standing on their feet, breaking their back.
People aren't doing that because it's fun, happy time. People are doing that because it's time to feed my family and power the electric. It's necessity.
Again, but that's been the status quo. That's been the narrative, and that's been the norm. Yes. But again, that's not. I feel it's not up for me to judge anybody's where they divert their attention. But what we're happening for the first time in history is the liberation of what people are going to be able to do throughout their days with abundance, with automation, with all of these things. We're not going to have to be scavenging for this scarcity.
We're creating our own focal points for this attention. Even us here by doing this show and having these discussions, we're creating this. Here, focus your attention here for an hour.
We're creating our own narrative instead of tuning into the narrative
and ours
of the
is
mainstream.
Much better because it doesn't have this
Again, that's
crazy
a judgment.
hidden agenda.
That's a judgment. Some people really like Glenn Beck. Some people really like Hannity.
Some people
and
don't
that's
know
on
better.
them.
And
Some
fine.
people
But
really like
it
us.
It goes back to the amygdala, though. The pain response is very addictive to a lot of people. If you've been raised on pain, it's very addicting. I mean, I was raised on a certain amount of pain, and I had to overcome that addiction to pain. So when someone, I was drawn to relationships that were painful. I was drawn, whether that was personal or in friendships or in business relationships, I was drawn to people who would cause me pain. And so if people are addicted to the amygdala pushers, they're addicted to the pain syndrome, right? Wow. So they're going to seek that out. So it's a matter of using our empathy as technology grows to reach out to these people. I've done this on my Facebook page with Serious Wonder. I've had conversations, because when I post something, typically I will stay on the page for the next 30 to 40 minutes to have conversations with people as they respond to the posts. And so I've had really beautiful, deep experiences with people from all over the world who have very different lifestyles, who have very different philosophies on life and the way that they look at their universe. And yet, at the same time, we have been able to have conversations with each other and realize that efficiency towards love and efficiency towards optimism and efficiency towards progress is really the only way to find happiness, because otherwise you're just recycling old amygdala responses. I mean, and that's just not beneficial. It's not It's been proven it's not beneficial because stress kills.
Cortisol,
Cortisol. So I guess my point is automation, which is inevitable, will cause humanity not only to be free to do the things that they love and pursue ideas, imagine the person who is forced because of necessity to work in a factory right now. Let's just take like an 18-year-old who is forced because of his situation to work in a factory, and yet that same 18-year-old is the next Einstein. And because he's freed finally from working in that situation, he can go and spend weeks and weeks just working on one formula or working on an invention. So innovation, my sort of imagining of the future is that innovation, because of automation, innovation is going to exponentially change. Yeah. It's going to exponentially grow. You're going to see innovations. This is why I think Ray Kurzweil knew that the singularity is coming, was because he knew that automation was coming. Yeah. You can't have the singularity unless automation happens. Yep. With automation, the singularity suddenly takes off. Wow. So as people are freed, you're going to see innovation in areas that you cannot believe. So you want to walk on water? Get ready.
I love it.
So floating cars, vertical farms,
sex robots.
Robots.
As we started partner. This one. This is incredibly exciting, Gray. We are past the 2-hour mark. We're going to have you back on. You're hitting up the 2045. And hopefully we can get you on around there if you're up for it while you're out there. I'm trying to work the logistics, but I'm not sure I can get out there. But if not, I'd like to vicariously get you on and let you tell us what's actually going on there. I know Randall, if you haven't touched base with him, he's the science director over there, headed up the brain activity map, and I can get you in touch with him as well. Yeah, but we would love to have you on and get your input on what's actually happening over there, if you'd be up for that.
Absolutely, yeah. I know it's. I'm going to the event here. It's in June, I think. 2 days,
June,
1 day.
June.
I don't remember.
Yeah. That's going to be beautiful. This has been a true opportunity. This has been fantastic. You can check him out at the Twitter, and it's Serious Wonder, correct? At Twitter?
You can do at Serious Wonder or at Gray Scott, or you can find me, same websites, grayscott.com
and that's
seriouswonder.com. GRAYSCOTT. Yeah.
Perfect. It truly has been a pleasure there, Gray. My brain is literally on. It needs some octane.
Yeah, thanks for your time, man. We definitely appreciate your time and talking with us about all of these amazing things.
And we will do it in the future, all right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right, talk to you soon.
Bye,
Thank
Gray.
you.
Gray Scott, everyone.
Wow.
GrayScott.com, SeriousWonder.com. Amazing stuff.
That was
Episode
beautiful,
7.
Matt. Episode 7. This has been awesome. And again, hit us up, rate us. I guess that helps with our ratings.
Subscribe in iTunes, rate and review the show. We appreciate that. Share it with your friends.
Stitcher. Oh, the Facebook. There's a Facebook page dedicated to the Techno-Optimist now, so we could have the fan base start to communicate through there and not through the Simulate Hub. That one's going to be more pronounced to just articles and such that are around the simulation and more keeping it the niche that it is, because it's such a new type of concept. The Facebook page with the Techno-Optimist is going to cover all the latest type of technologies and things that are coming online.
And we'll mirror that probably over on the Google Plus page.
And yes, Matt's going to head
Google
up.
Plus, not
there
on
you
Facebook,
go. So I'll handle the Facebook.
Sure.
Matt will handle the Google Plus. So make sure to check out those 2 pages. And with that,
you've been listening to the Techno-Optimist, Kevin, Matt. That was Gray Scott, Futurist Neuro-Technology-Philosopher, speaker. That was awesome.
Thank you for hanging in there.
Next episode.
Absolutely.